In his essay, New Year's Eve, from January of 1821, which he first published in London Magazine, Lamb lists the parts of his life that he most loves, the parts of his life that he just simply could not do without. And here they are: sun and sky and breeze, and solitary walks, and summer holidays, and the greenness of fields, and the delicious juices of meats and fishes, and society, and the cheerful glass, and candlelight, and fireside conversations, and innocent vanities, and jests, and irony itself. Do these things go out with life? He, of course, hopes not. I love the line, innocent vanities, such a charming idea that it's okay to be vain from time to time if you have an innocent intent behind it. But of all these things he lists, the only one that he italicizes, that he underlines, of all the things in this list, is irony itself. Lamb was a great lover of irony. Irony is his primary aesthetic habit. And we learn this in a somewhat ironic context when we read the obituary of Elia. Remember that Lamb created the persona Elia or Elia. I'll sometimes say it one way, some another, because no one really knows exactly how Lamb wanted it pronounced. But in 1823, after Elia had written many, many essays in London Magazine, Lamb imagined a friend of Elia named Phil Elia writing the obituary of Elia. So here we have Lamb's persona, Elia, dead, and another persona of Lamb, Phil Elia, writing the obituary for this Elia. And here's what Phil Elia says. And of course, it's quite comical that Lamb is making fun of Elia, which really means that Lamb is making fun of himself, because Elia is very closely based on Lamb's actual life. Few understood him, and I'm not certain that at all times he quite understood himself. He too much affected that dangerous figure, irony, that dangerous figure, irony. So let's talk for a minute about the two primary modes of Lamb's irony. One mode of Lambian irony is what we might call circumstantial irony, which is simply irony as the opposite of what is expected. So we read an essay like New Year's Eve, and we probably expect it to be about beginnings, how the new year is about a time for making resolutions toward the future. But in fact, the essay is about how Elia hates the future. He has no desire to move into the future. He likes his life now in the present because of the delicious juices of fish and green fields and irony. But what he most likes is the past, when he was a child, but his past is so distant from his current present position that he can't even access it at all. So ultimately, New Year's Eve is not about newness at all. It's about the impossibility of newness. Similarly, when we read the essay Two Races of Men, Lamb, against all expectation, says that those who borrow are far better than those who lend. And the more you borrow and the less you pay back, the better, because the more unfettered you are. Again, opposite of what is expected. And there are many such examples throughout Lamb's essays. But the most powerful, the most subtle form of irony for Lamb is what we call verbal irony, which is a form of irony in which the speaker seems to be aware that he or she is speaking irony, and the speech means one thing and its opposite at the same time. Now, we see this play of irony in the essay, the mock obituary of Phil Elia, friend of Elia, for Elia. Look at the various ways that the piece cancels itself out. First of all, Charles Lamb has a literary persona, Elia. So already the figure of Elia is somewhat ironic because he is Lamb. He definitely bears features of Lamb, but he is not Lamb. He seems to be much more optimistic than the actual Lamb ever was. So Elia is and is not in that way. He is Lamb and he is not Lamb. Furthermore, Elia is real in that so far as he is Lamb, but he is also not real insofar as he is a mere fiction. So that's going on. But then when you bring this third person in, Phil Elia, things become even more complicated. Lamb imagines his persona dead. So he kills off someone who really can't die because that someone is not real. And then he imagines this friend of Elijah writing a fairly critical obituary of this dead friend. So who is this Philoli? He doesn't exist either. So he exists to do what? To make fun of a character who does not exist. And this character who does not exist exists to do what? Who knows? Possibly to express a kind of positive verve that Lamb himself felt that he lacked in his everyday life, mainly because of his alcoholism and his persistent melancholy. So this is just one of many moments where you see Lamb saying and unsaying at the same time, putting his writing, as it were, under erasure, positing and unpositing. Now, why would one do this, either through verbal irony or circumstantial irony? Well, irony has many functions, as we know. It can be satirical. For instance, that's one primary mode of irony. But I think in Lamb's case, irony is valuable because it's playful. It opens up possibilities. A sentence does not simply need to mean one thing. It can mean two things, perhaps three things, four things, five things. And these two things, three things, four things, five things don't need to harmonize at all. They can be different. They can be scattershot. So Lamb, who felt constrained working for the East India Company, who felt constrained by his drinking, who felt constrained by having to care for Mary, through irony can be unconstrained. He can generate possibility, potentiality, pluralism. And I think that he really enjoyed this linguistically. In addition to irony, Lamb also loved punning. And what is a pun? But it's a word that means one thing and another thing at the same time, and again, maybe another thing and another thing. So a pun has the same kind of structure of irony in this way, in that it proliferates meaning instead of pins meaning down. So as you're going through the Lamb, pay attention to these moments of irony. Irony as circumstantial, opposite of what's expected. Irony as verbal, saying one thing and unsaying it at the same time. But also look for other linguistic forms that generate, proliferate, as opposed to pinning down, such as pun, also paradox, also hyperbole.